be my delight and my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this morning, because she is an amazing person and she's been an amazing friend to me. Our speaker this morning is Harned. Crystal is an amazing gal. She has come through a lot. She overcame a lot of hardships through hard work while raising 3 children and going to LeTourneau University. One of the things that I love about Crystal is she is one of the most giving people that I have ever met. And she is very giving in her business with her clients. She is extremely passionate about excellent customer service. She is definitely someone in business who goes above and beyond the call of duty to make sure that her clients are satisfied and well taken care of. So please welcome with me the beautiful, the marvelous Crystal Harned.
Good morning again, everyone. So I put out 2 handouts for everybody. One of them is an article that I wrote after I read about an Oregon case where, and I'll go over it a little bit more later. So I actually wrote this and I asked for it to be published on my blog, and I sent it to Sandra. So I'll go over it a little bit more later. And then the other one is questions and answers about why cyber liability is so important. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to discuss specialty products that a lot of you either have heard of and don't think you need, or don't even know exist. And I'm going to give you real life claim scenarios that my insurance carriers gave me when I went to them and said, I want real life claim scenarios. So I'm going to start with what's called an international package policy. And what that policy offers, it offers liability, it offers rental car coverage, it offers accidental death and disbursement, it offers medical, and most importantly, it offers repatriation when you travel outside of the U.S. And so a couple of claim scenarios is difference in limits on contingent auto liability. If you go to Mexico and you rent a vehicle, their liability limits are substantially lower, and this particular incident, the person who rented the vehicle had an accident and killed the other party. The other party's family sued, and the Mexican law decided that he was responsible for $500,000 US. He did not have an international policy, and therefore his limits of $40,000, which is all that the Mexican government requires them to carry, wasn't sufficient to cover the $500,000 for the death of that person. So had they had the international policy, they would have had sufficient limits to cover that. Then when it comes to coverage jurisdiction on products liability, if you're making a product, whatever it may be, in this case they were making a burner that goes on furnaces, and it happened in France where this burner went out and actually caused, I went over this stuff last night, so I want to look at where exactly my notes are. It suffered premature failure and damage to the third party's customer furnace. And of course, that company was in Germany. They came back and they sued the American company, and the general liability here in the US, the territory was only the US and Puerto Rico. No coverage for the product's liability in France. So there again, that company, corporation, or entity was responsible to pay that, or would have had a judgment, depending on what their situation was. And then the trip travel executive assistance, that's really important, because if you are injured while you're in another country, the executive assistance does a number of things, and I'll use this claim. There was a U.S.-based charitable organization that took a mission trip to the village of Zimbabwe, and they stayed in a campsite. One of the volunteers contracted malaria while there, and there were no qualified medical facilities within the reasonable distance from the charity's campsite. So they had to be evacuated to a medical facility in Johannesburg at a cost of $30,000. The person traveling with that particular individual also wanted to be accompany them to Johannesburg, and that was an additional $10,000. So this particular program that I'm talking about, the ACE International Advantage Policy, would provide the executive assistance services and benefits for the cost of that emergency evacuation to the nearest adequate medical facility. and that would have included the accompany person. Also, property damage from foreign travel for commercial general liability. So an employee of an organization is out at a conference somewhere and they accidentally leave the water running in the bathtub in the hotel where they're staying. Corporate's paying for this hotel, so the hotel knows who the company is, and the damage that was caused because it wasn't found until the leak went through to the floors beneath, ended up being a substantial amount because water damage is not a small claim. And so basically that company in, let me see if I can see it, it was in Belize. The company in Belize immediately sent demands to the owner of the U.S. company, and the general liability again, being that the territory for that particular policy was only in the United States and Puerto Rico, there was no coverage. So without the international policy, once again, they pay out of pocket, or the corporation's pocket. So moving on to employment practices liability, which is part of what this article that I wrote was about. And I have two scenarios. One is the article itself. Now with all these new laws and ordinances that are being passed in regards to discrimination against same-sex orientation, it has become an even bigger deal than what it was before. So in Oregon, a lesbian couple went to a bakery and they asked to have a cake made for their wedding. They were denied because basically it was a Christian company and it went against their values. Well, there was a law passed in Oregon that said that they could not be discriminated against. So they were not counting the expenses to be defended by their attorney, by the way, but that's a whole separate expense. But they were fined $150,000. So $150,000 plus whatever defense costs would have been, which just depends how long the case went. But I know cases like this, minimum defense costs start at like 40 grand and then start to go up. So if they did not have an employment practices liability coverage in place that included third-party coverage, that's the key, it had to include third-party coverage, that came out of their company's pocket. And if they weren't a big bakery, that could very well put them out of business. Employment practices is excluded on the general liability policy. You might get a throw-in of $10,000, but that $10,000 is nowhere near enough to cover something like this. Another thing that's going on right now in California, how many of you are familiar with the Powell versus Kleiner Perkins Caulfield company in San Francisco? Okay, so this is a sexual, not discrimination, what's my word for it? It is sexual discrimination. Basically, she alleged that she was passed over for promotion after being there for many years, and when she complained to the higher ups, they dismissed her and fired her. So she is currently suing them for $16 million in lost wages and bonuses. And the judge just approved this week that he was going to allow punitive damages to be incorporated into the punishment phase. So, punitive damages is 3 times whatever the actual damage amount is determined by the jury, and the jury is deciding this case. So once again, if that company didn't have employment practices liability in place, there would be no coverage. It's all coming at defense costs, and damages are all going to be coming out of the corporation's assets. And in this particular case, $16 million, that's quite a chunk of money. So they would have had a really high limit on their employment practices to even have the majority of the coverage. And so now I'm going to move along to cyber liability. Am I doing okay on time?
You're at 8 minutes and 2
All right,
seconds.
so I'll make it quick. Cyber liability, I gave you question and answers so that you can look at later. But basically, data breaches come from different sources: external hackers, malicious insiders, and simple carelessness. Simple carelessness being the majority of where it comes from. And I'm just going to give you a few examples again. These are claims that were paid out by Beasley Insurance Company. A healthcare provider experienced a possible malware event. Beasley paid out $175,000 for forensic expenses in excess of the insured's $20,000 retention, and it was discovered that there was no further action needed. So even though no further action was needed, $175,000 was paid out. So if you have a data breach, just to do the forensic work to determine if there's an issue that you need to take further action, is about $175,000. That's just depending on this company size. Another one is a managed care organization had numerous hard drives stolen from an off-site storage facility. Beasley paid $2 million towards forensics and notification costs. And then I will go, let me make sure if I should skip or not. I'm gonna go ahead and skip to crimes because I know I'm running out of time. So crime coverage examples. Everybody gets a small $25,000 employee dishonesty sub-limit on their business owner's policy. Well, that's a little basic coverage that practically covers nothing. A full-blown crime policy covers computer fraud, wire fraud, employee dishonesty, even to your clients, if they steal from your clients as well. So you want to make sure that third-party coverage is there. So here's 2 examples. The owner of a high-end retail clothing store discovered far too late that his manager was stealing a substantial amount of clothing over a 12-month period. The owner did not have a crime policy in place, and his employee dishonesty limit was only $25,000. The loss was so substantial that he had to file for bankruptcy and close his business. And since I'm out of time, does anybody have any questions for me?
After scaring the heck out of me and realizing that a quarter of my income should go to interest. No. So question, if I'm traveling overseas, obviously I may not travel as an executive all the time. Is there temporary policies to kind of talk about what you're talking about? So if I go to France, are there temporary policies I can purchase to help cover me on certain part of the city?
You don't have to be an actual company to qualify for the coverage, and this Advantage plan that I'm talking about is as low as like $1,250 for the whole year. You can't get it as a one-time shot, but the good thing is you get it for a year. If you travel multiple times all over, you're covered everywhere you go. And there's kidnap and ransom in it too. I didn't mention that because those aren't the main claims.
Cheer me up.
So I have clients that travel a lot. I have clients that travel a lot,
Okay.
especially my retired individuals who have a stack of cash and they're trying to go through it. And I guess that would be a good, I'm pretty sure they don't have international coverage.
It would be a good thing to talk to them about and just make them aware of the potentials of what happens.
No,
if
usually
something
people that
happens.
have stuff, they need more insurance, so they make sure that people don't try to take it. Okay. I'm gonna have to get with you on that, we'll do it one-on-one.
Okay.
Is there specific, like on the employment practices, is there specific exclusions to like, some federal guy comes along and says, you violate this, and then another, guy says, I didn't violate, and it's like a back and forth. And does that, like, if it says, oh, here it is in writing, or you absolutely said I wouldn't serve this type of couple, I mean, is that excluded from the policy, or it's like, no?
No. In fact, I listed all the acts that are pertinent right now and a couple of the ordinance in that article. Those are the acts that employment practices liability falls under. That's exactly why you need the coverage. The only exclusions are anything that's not covered. So you're not gonna have general liability, you're not gonna have, the coverages that are on other policies. But no, there's no exclusion. Discrimination is discrimination. And if there's a law set or an ordinance, like here we have a city ordinance that says a public place cannot discriminate against same-sex orientation. So, it's just, that's why that policy exists. And it's just, the limits that you get, and in some cases, like, as you can see, some people need really high limits.
Is it really expensive?
Not really, it depends on, it's based on number of employees.
Okay, and what you do and your type of.
So, exactly, so if you have 50 employees, it's gonna be more expensive than if you have.
An employment agency would cost you a lot more than if you weren't.
Exactly, in fact, I just quoted one, and the employment practices liability portion of it was about $900 for 6 employees for the year, at $1 million limit.
That's a law, the local law, we were talking about that company situation.
We here in Houston, that was in Oregon, but here in Houston, Anise Parker passed an ordinance last year that she amended the ordinance to include if you're a public company and you're open to the public, you cannot discriminate against same-sex orientation.
Don't businesses have the right of refusal to anyone based on any,
Not if it's for a discriminatory purpose.
they can just say it's for some other reason.
But if they open their mouth and say,
Oh, yeah.
oh, it's against my religion, now you're
Yeah,
discriminating.
yeah, well, themselves,
So I have one question.
Sure.
So, this may not be, this is your industry, but, so for instance, we have a situation where in a press release, we use the phrase, let's get ready to rumble, because that's the industry we're in. And then, of course, within an hour, we got an email from an attorney saying, oh, by the way, that's our phrase, now you insurance policy would have covered our tail on that, or would it?
Absolutely.
Like-
So here's the thing, and so Sandra's company's excluded and Zach's company's excluded because they are in the advertising industry, and in the general liability wording, it says that anybody in the advertising industry does not qualify for the personal and advertising injury coverage as part of the general liability. But because you're not in that industry, you are covered. So your general liability policy would cover that automatically. It's a coverage. Like I said, with the exclusions of anybody who's involved in advertising.
Whoever mentioned this. Okay, awesome.